Nobody in the Galactic Research Consortium had ever survived a close encounter with a Vorrkai. Not a planned one, anyway. The files were thin on survivors because the files were thin on anyone who got close enough to study one and then had the audacity to still be alive afterward. The Vorrkai was classified Threat Level 9 out of 10. The only thing sitting at a 10 was a supernova and a particularly bad Tuesday on the Keth homeworld. Every species in the consortium had a word for the Vorrkai. The Yaleth called it the ending that moves. The Srrath called it don't. Humanity called it Biscuit. Dr. Yenva Osk had been a xenobiologist for 31 years. She had cataloged creatures that breathed acid, organisms that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and one particularly memorable fungal network that had tried to file a noise complaint against her research shuttle. She had never, not once, in 31 years, been genuinely, completely, cosmically baffled. Until she walked into Research Bay 7 on the Endless Meridian and found Lieutenant Commander Jake Reyes sitting cross-legged on the floor, feeding something the size of a cargo loader what appeared to be, by all available evidence, a piece of flatbread. "What," said Dr. Osk, "is happening?" It wasn't a question. It was the sound a person makes when their entire professional understanding of the universe quietly folds itself into a paper crane and flies out a window. "Hey, Doc." Jake didn't look up. "Careful with the door. Biscuit gets anxious when there's a draft." The Vorrkai, Threat Level 9, the creature whose file had a disclaimer on the disclaimer, lifted its head. 6 limbs, armored plating that had shrugged off directed energy weapons in 3 separate documented incidents, teeth that the file describes as numerous and enthusiastic, eyes like molten copper, ancient and sharp and evaluating everything they touched. Those eyes found Dr. Osk. She stopped breathing. The Vorrkai made a sound. It was, without question, the most terrifying creature she had ever encountered in 31 years of fieldwork. It was, also, without question, purring. "How," Dr. Osk said carefully, "did you do this?" Jake Reyes finally looked up. He had the expression of a man who had done something either very brilliant or very stupid and hadn't yet figured out which. "Honestly," he scratched the back of his neck, "I just talked to it." Dr. Osk looked at the purring Vorrkai. She looked at Jake Reyes. She pulled out her research recorder with the focused energy of someone who had just realized they were standing at the most important moment in xenobiological history, and absolutely nobody was going to believe a word of it. "From the beginning," she said, "tell me everything."
Jake Reyes had not set out to befriend the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. To be fair, nobody ever did. That was the thing about Biscuit. You didn't decide to befriend a Vorrkai. The Vorrkai decided you were interesting. And then you either panicked, which apparently ended badly based on the files, or you did what Jake did, which was offer it a piece of flatbread and say, "Hey there, big guy." But Dr. Osk needed the whole story, so Jake started at the beginning. 3 weeks earlier, the Endless Meridian had been tasked with a survey mission on Crestfall 7, standard class, atmospheric readings, soil samples, preliminary fauna cataloging, the kind of mission that generated 17 reports nobody would read and one very good nap schedule. Jake was on perimeter watch, 3rd shift. The part of the job where nothing happened, and the stars just sat there being stars, and your coffee went cold before you remembered it existed. He heard it before he saw it. Not a growl, not a roar, something lower than that. A vibration that started in the ground and worked its way up through his boots and into his chest, and settled somewhere near his spine with the specific message, "Something very large is deciding what to do about you." He turned around slowly. The Vorrkai was 7 meters tall, standing at the edge of the tree line, absolutely still. Its armored plating caught the moonlight in dull blue-gray angles. Its 6 limbs were planted wide. Its copper eyes, all 4 of them, were fixed on Jake with an intelligence that punched him in the stomach harder than the fear did. Protocol said, "Activate emergency beacon, fall back to the ship, do not engage." Jake activated his beacon. Then he stood completely still. Because here was the thing nobody put in the protocol, and Jake had noticed this gap, had thought about it on long third shifts with cold coffee. The Vorrkai incidents that ended badly all had one thing in common. The human ran. Every single time. The human saw the Vorrkai, the human panicked, the human ran, and the Vorrkai, being a predator with 400 million years of evolutionary programming, did what predators do when something smaller and slower tries to flee. It chased. Jake didn't run. He stood there with his cold coffee and his emergency beacon and his heart doing something creative inside his ribcage, and he looked at the Vorrkai, and the Vorrkai looked at him, and Jake said the first thing that came into his head. "You're enormous, man." The Vorrkai's ears, 2 of them, tall and ridged like satellite dishes, rotated toward him. Jake took that as a good sign. "I'm Jake," he said. "I'm going to very slowly reach into my kit and get some food out, because I think better when I'm eating, and I feel like this situation calls for my best thinking." He moved slowly, deliberately, watching those copper eyes track every motion with absolute precision. His hand found the flatbread. He broke off a piece, held it out, felt immediately ridiculous. Then felt considerably less ridiculous when the Vorrkai leaned forward, 7 meters of armored apex predator, moving with the liquid grace of something that had never once in its evolutionary history needed to hurry, and sniffed his hand. Its breath was warm. It smelled like ozone and deep forest, and something Jake's brain filed under ancient. It did not eat him. He'd learn later that Vorrkai were obligate carnivores, and flatbread was nutritionally irrelevant. But it sniffed it, considered it, and then looked back up at Jake with those copper eyes and made a sound he'd never heard before. Low, resonant, almost like a question. "Yeah," Jake said softly, "I don't totally know what I'm doing either." The Vorrkai sat down, all 7 meters of it, folding with improbable grace into a seated position, its 6 limbs tucking with geometric precision, its eyes never leaving his face, and it waited, like it wanted to see what he'd do next. Jake sat down too. "Okay, so you come here often?" Dr. Osk had stopped writing notes somewhere around "You're enormous, man," not because she stopped being interested, because her hands had started shaking too much to hold the recorder steady. "You sat down," she said, "in front of a Vorrkai?" "In front of Biscuit," Jake corrected, with the gentle firmness of someone making an important distinction. "Why Biscuit?" Jake glanced at the creature currently occupying most of Research Base 7, its armored tail sweeping slow arcs across the floor, with the casual contentment of something that had decided it was exactly where it wanted to be. "Felt right," he said. Dr. Osk looked at Biscuit. Biscuit looked back at Dr. Osk. Then Biscuit sneezed, a sound like a controlled detonation, and 3 wall panels rattled in their frames. "Sorry, dust bothers them." Dr. Osk made a note, then another. Then she looked up. "Jake, the consortium is going to want a full debrief. Command is going to want a containment protocol. Half the scientific community is going to want—" "Yeah, I know. They're going to say it's not safe." Jake looked at Biscuit. Biscuit had lowered its enormous head to the floor and closed 2 of its 4 eyes. The other 2 tracked Jake with the soft, unfocused attention of something that was almost asleep but wanted to know he was still there. "Yeah," Jake said quietly, "they're going to be real surprised."
The consortium's response arrived in 47 minutes. Jake knew because he timed it. He'd made a bet with himself. He'd given them an hour. They beat it by 13 minutes, which meant someone very senior had been woken up, which meant the emergency beacon flag had escalated further than he'd expected, which meant the message was from Admiral Varys Khan herself. 7 paragraphs, formal header, 14 attached protocols. Jake read the subject line, which was Vorrkai contact event, immediate containment and crew evacuation required. Then he looked at Biscuit, who had found his spare jacket in the corner of the bay and was using it as a pillow. He typed back, working on it. Dr. Osk read the Admiral's message over his shoulder and experienced the specific professional vertigo of watching someone casually ignore 14 protocols simultaneously. You cannot just say working on it to Admiral Khan. Already sent. Jake, Doc, he turned to face her, and his expression was patient and serious in a way that made her stop. I need you to watch something, okay? Just watch. He stood up, crossed the bay, stopped 2 meters from Biscuit's enormous resting head. Biscuit's 2 open eyes tracked him. The other 2 opened slowly. Jake crouched down to eye level, which meant he was crouching down to the level of an eye that was roughly the size of his torso. He held that position, steady, relaxed. Then he did something Dr. Osk had never seen in 31 years of xenobiology fieldwork. He blinked, slowly, deliberately, the way you'd blink at a cat. The bay was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Biscuit blinked back, slowly, deliberately, all 4 eyes, in sequence. Dr. Osk's recorder hit the floor. She didn't notice. That's not, she started. Feline slow blink response, Jake said quietly, not moving. Works about 60% of predatory species I've encountered. Signals non-aggression, non-competition. Says, I see you and I'm not here to fight. He paused. Biscuit figured out I was doing it on purpose somewhere around day 2. How do you know? Because on day 3, Biscuit did it first. Dr. Osk retrieved her recorder, sat down on an equipment crate, spent a moment simply breathing. Because what Jake had just described wasn't animal behavioral conditioning. It was communication, deliberate, reciprocal, initiated eventually by the Vorrkai itself, which meant somewhere inside that armored 7-meter threat level 9 skull was a mind that had looked at this strange, soft, slow, flatbread-carrying biped and decided, consciously, intentionally, to talk back. The consortium files say Vorrkai are solitary, non-communicative outside mating seasons, incapable of forming cross-species bonds. The consortium files, Jake said, were written by people who ran. He said it without judgment, just fact. Dr. Osk thought about 31 years of research, about how much of xenobiology is built on observations made from a safe distance, through sensors, from ships, from behind glass. How many conclusions had been drawn about what a creature was based entirely on how it behaved when it was being fled from. She thought about what you might learn if you just stayed. Her mind went somewhere unexpected and uncomfortable. Jake, how long did it take before Biscuit, before the Vorrkai was comfortable? With me? He considered. About 4 hours on day 1. I just kept talking, kept my voice level, kept not running. He paused. It kept getting closer, testing distance, watching how I responded when it moved. I think it was waiting for me to break. But you didn't. I was scared out of my mind, he said simply. But scared doesn't mean run. Scared just means pay attention. Biscuit made a sound then, low. That resonant, almost question from the first night. Jake answered it without thinking. A short, low sound back. Not words, just tone. Just, I'm here, I hear you, we're okay. Biscuit's tail swept once across the floor. Dr. Osk watched this exchange with the expression of someone watching physics rearrange itself. It thinks you're the same species, doesn't it? Jake blinked. That surprised him. She could see it. He looked at Biscuit, really looked, in the way you look at something you've gotten so familiar with that you stopped seeing it clearly. "No, I don't think that's it," he said finally, thoughtfully. "I think it knows exactly what I am." He paused. "I think that's why it's interested." Before Dr. Osk could process that, before she could follow that thread to wherever it led, her own comm unit fired. Not the Admiral this time. The ship's external sensor array. 3 consortium vessels had just dropped out of FTL, and they were broadcasting on the emergency containment frequency. Biscuit heard it too. Every one of its 4 eyes opened fully. Its ears rotated toward the hull. The low, resonant sound it made this time was different, shorter, sharper. Not a question, a warning.
The 3 consortium vessels were called the Threshold, the Iron Meridian, and the Unyielding Accord. Jake knew their classifications without looking them up. You spent enough years in the service, you learned ship profiles the way you learned faces. The Threshold was a containment vessel, specialized hull, reinforced bays, equipment designed for one specific purpose: capturing and transporting creatures that did not want to be captured or transported. The Iron Meridian was a combat escort. The Unyielding Accord was Admiral Khan's flagship. Jake stared at the sensor readout for a long moment. Then he looked at Biscuit. Biscuit was already standing, all 6 limbs planted, ears forward. Armored plating shifted. He'd learned to read that, the way the plates realigned when Biscuit moved from rest to alert, like a subtle change in posture that meant every system was online and paying attention. The copper eyes had gone from soft to sharp in the space of a single breath. The ship was about to become a problem. Admiral Varys Khan's face appeared on the bay's comm screen 17 seconds later. She was exactly what her file suggested: sharp-featured, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of making decisions that couldn't be unmade. She took in the scene with one long, controlled look. The research bay, Dr. Osk sitting on an equipment crate with a recorder in her shaking hands, Jake standing between the Admiral's direct line of sight and a 7-meter apex predator. Biscuit, who was looking at the screen with the focused attention of something that understood, on some level, that the small glowing rectangle had just become the most important object in the room. "Admiral," Jake's voice was calm, "I'd like to suggest we take a breath before—" "That is not a request." "I know." He didn't move. "But if I step away right now, Biscuit is going to read that as me responding to a threat. And then Biscuit is going to respond to the threat, and this conversation is going to get a lot harder to have." Silence on the line. The Admiral's eyes moved to Biscuit. Biscuit's eyes moved to the Admiral. "You named it," she said, flat, unreadable. "Felt important too." "Why?" Jake considered for a moment. "Because things with names are harder to write off." Dr. Osk watched the Admiral's expression shift, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, and filed it away. Because what moved across Varys Khan's face wasn't anger, it wasn't the bureaucratic irritation of a protocol being violated. It was something quieter, something that looked briefly like recognition. It was gone before Dr. Osk could be certain she'd seen it. "The containment team will board in 20 minutes. I strongly recommend—" Biscuit moved. Not toward the screen, not toward Jake, sideways. 2 fluid steps that repositioned its entire body mass between Jake and the bay's main entrance. Armored plating fully realigned, head lowered. Not attacking, not threatening, blocking. The Admiral went very still. "It just," she started, "positioned itself between me and the door," Jake finished quietly. "Yeah." Another silence, longer this time. "That's protective behavior," Dr. Osk said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. "That's documented protective behavior. I've only seen it in Vorrkai pack records, historical ones, pre-extinction of their social group structure. They used to do that for—" She stopped. "For family," Jake said.
The word landed in the bay like something physical. Biscuit's plating shifted again, that slow, subtle realignment, and then it did something none of them expected. It turned its head, just slightly, and looked at Jake. Not at the screen, not at the door, at Jake. All 4 eyes, soft. That slow, deliberate blink. Jake blinked back. Admiral Khan watched this exchange with an expression that had quietly abandoned all of its previous certainty and was now navigating unfamiliar territory without a map. "How long," she said carefully, "has it been displaying bonding behavior?" "Since day 4, Dr. Osk answered, because her researcher instincts had overridden everything else, though the literature on Vorrkai is wrong, Jake said, not unkindly. Most of it, anyway. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. The containment team... Admiral, Jake finally turned fully to face the screen. I need you to hear me. If that team comes through that door with containment equipment, Biscuit is going to see a threat to me, and a Vorrkai responding to a threat to someone it's bonded with. He paused, chose the word deliberately. There won't be a Research Bay 7 anymore. The silence this time had a different quality. Heavy, calculating, honest. What exactly are you proposing, Lieutenant Commander? Jake glanced at Biscuit. Biscuit was still watching him with those soft copper eyes, still positioned at the door, still steady, still trusting. Give me 48 hours, Jake said. Let Dr. Osk run her assessment. Let me show you what Biscuit actually is, not what the file says it is. And if I don't like what I see? Jake was quiet for a beat. Then at least you'll have seen it. The Admiral studied him, studied Biscuit, studied the space between them, that invisible thread that had no clinical name but was visible to anyone in the room who was paying attention. She made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh. 48 hours, Lieutenant Commander. The screen went dark. Biscuit's plating slowly, gradually shifted back to resting position. And then it walked, with that liquid, unhurried Vorrkai grace, back to the corner where Jake's jacket was still crumpled on the floor. Circled once, lay down, looked at Jake with 2 of its 4 eyes, the other 2 already closing. Yeah, I know. Get some rest. Dr. Osk stared at the corner where the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy had just gone to sleep on a lieutenant commander's spare jacket. Jake, she said quietly. Yeah, 48 hours isn't enough. He looked at her. She met his eyes. I know, but it's enough to start. She looked down at her recorder, at the hours of data she had already collected, at the impossible, paradigm-destroying, career-defining thing she'd been watching all afternoon. Then she looked back up. Then we'd better not waste any of it.
The 48 hours did not go smoothly. Nobody who has ever tried to convince an admiral, 3 ship crews, a containment team, and the entire galactic research consortium that the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy was currently napping on a jacket and should probably be left alone would describe the process as smooth. Hour 1. The containment team lead, a Srrath officer named Vessels of Consequence, spent 20 minutes outside the bay door, breathing in a controlled pattern that Jake recognized as the Srrath equivalent of active meditation. Or possibly active terror management. Probably both. Hour 4, Dr. Osk transmitted her preliminary field notes to the consortium's xenobiology board. 3 senior researchers responded immediately. 2 of them were angry. One of them, Dr. Hess Orvain, author of the definitive Vorrkai behavioral study, 70 years in the field, 16 honorary degrees, responded with 2 words: show me. Hour 11, Biscuit sneezed again and took out a lighting panel. Maintenance was notified. Maintenance requested hazard pay. Jake felt that was fair. It was hour 19 when everything changed. Not dramatically, not with an explosion or a confrontation or a moment that announced itself as significant. It happened quietly, the way the most important things usually do. Admiral Khan came to the bay alone. No escort, no containment team, no comm screen buffer between her and the reality of what was in the room. Just the Admiral in a plain duty uniform, standing at the open bay door at 0300 ship time when the corridors were empty and nobody was watching. Jake was awake. He'd been sleeping in shifts, unwilling to leave Biscuit alone in an unfamiliar environment with 3 containment vessels parked outside. He saw the Admiral in the doorway and stood. She waved him down. Then she just looked. At Biscuit, sleeping in the corner, Jake's jacket still serving as a pillow, 2 of 4 eyes half open in that not-quite-asleep way that Jake had learned meant, "I know you're there and I've decided you're not a problem." At the easy way Jake's posture changed when she entered, not snapping to attention, but angling slightly, unconsciously, toward Biscuit, positioning himself in the space between, just like Biscuit had done at the door. The Admiral stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "How did you know it wouldn't kill you?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "I didn't," he said honestly, "but it hadn't moved when I turned around. It could have... I had my back to it for at least 30 seconds before I noticed it. It had every advantage." He paused. "It didn't take them." "That's not a reason to trust something." "No," he agreed, "but it's a reason to not run." The Admiral's eyes stayed on Biscuit. Biscuit's half-open eyes stayed on the Admiral. "I had a dog," she said, quietly, like a confession, "before the service." She stopped. Started again. "There's a look they get when they've decided you're theirs." She paused. "I haven't seen it in 40 years." She was looking at Biscuit when she said it. Biscuit was looking back. And then, slowly, with the gravity of a planet shifting on its axis, Biscuit blinked. Slow, deliberate, all 4 eyes. The Admiral went completely still. Jake held his breath. Then, with a careful, self-conscious motion of someone doing something they'd never done before and weren't entirely sure was dignified, Admiral Varys Khan, commander of 3 vessels, highest-ranking officer in this sector, author of 14 containment protocols, blinked back. Slowly. Biscuit's tail swept once across the floor. And that was it. That was the whole moment. No fanfare, no dramatic declaration, just a 70-year-old Admiral and the most dangerous creature in the galaxy having a conversation in the only language that had ever mattered. "I see you. I'm not here to fight." Dr. Osk's full report took 11 days to compile and ran to 400 pages. The consortium's emergency review board took 3 weeks. Dr. Hess Orvain attended in person, which at his age required a medical team in a very specific chair, and he spent 6 hours watching Jake and Biscuit exist in the same space, and then told the board they could have his resignation or his endorsement. Their choice. They took the endorsement. The reclassification took 2 months, 17 committee meetings, and 1 incident where Biscuit attended a committee meeting in person, not planned, not sanctioned, the result of a door being left open, and the committee discovered that Vorrkai were significantly more persuasive in 3 dimensions than on paper. The reclassification passed unanimously. The new file on Vorrkai was written by Dr. Osk, with contributions from Jake, Admiral Khan, Dr. Orvain, and 1 line that Jake had insisted on including verbatim, which the editorial board had objected to and then included anyway because they couldn't find a scientific argument against it. It was in the behavioral summary under cross-species bonding potential. It read, "The Vorrkai does not bond with those who approach without fear. It bonds with those who approach without running. These are not the same thing. Courage, for the purposes of this taxonomy, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision, made consciously, made repeatedly, made in the presence of something that could end you, to stay anyway. The Vorrkai recognizes this. It has always recognized this. We simply never stayed long enough to notice." Below it, in the appendix, was a single photograph. Jake Reyes, cross-legged on the floor of Research Bay 7. Biscuit's enormous armored head resting on his knee. Jake's hand, small and human and utterly relaxed, resting between 2 of Biscuit's copper eyes. Both of them asleep. The photo had no caption. It didn't need one.
The last entry in Dr. Osk's personal research journal, dated the final day of the Endless Marillion mission, read, 31 years. I thought I knew what it meant to study life. I thought science was about distance, about objectivity, about not becoming part of the thing you're observing. Jake Reyes didn't study Biscuit. He just stayed. I think, if I'm honest, that is the most scientific thing I have ever watched a human being do. The Vorrkai were never untameable. We were just always running. 3 decks up, in Research Bay 7, Biscuit sneezed hard enough to rattle the hull plating. Jake, half asleep on his bedroll, didn't flinch. "Bless you," he muttered. Biscuit's tail swept once across the floor. Outside, the stars kept doing what stars do. And somewhere in the consortium's database, a file that used to say, "Do not approach," now said something different. Something nobody had ever thought to write before. Approach slowly, bring food, don't run, and for the love of everything, introduce yourself.